Good day, doctor. I'm Johnson Lee, 300337, and my teammate is Chong Jen 301803, and Lee Jia Heng, 302233. Today, we'll talk about the prisoner dilemma. The prisoner dilemma is a game theory that classic illustrating why individuals might not cooperate even it is in their best interest. In this game, it consists of two players. They can either cooperate or betray. Mutual, mutual cooperation benefit both, but betray is more tempting as it offers higher rewards and given the other defect. Hence, both tend to betray is leading to the worst outcome. This prisoner dilemma is found in the economics, biology, politics, and social behavior, anywhere individuals face an incentive to act selfishness. First of all, let me explain the rules. There is two isolated players are given a choice without communication. They can either cooperate by staying silent or betray to the others by defecting. Both players gets only the moderated rewards if they choose to cooperate. But both players also get penalty worse than the cooperation if both of them choose to defect. So when one of the players choose to defect, while the other players choose to cooperate, the defect will receive the highest reward, while the betrayer get the worst penalties.
Alright, now that we have gone through and understood the rules, now let's have a look at an example where there are two prisoners where both have the strategy of cooperating and defecting. Now, the benefits or the gain from both cooperating and defecting is shown in the table here, so you can have a look, and we will go through the strategy and setup later. Okay, now let's have a look at prisoner 1's strategy, which is to cooperate and defect. If prisoner 1 chooses to cooperate, while prisoner 2 chooses to cooperate as well, prisoner 1 will get a gain of -1, while if prisoner 2 chooses to defect, prisoner 1 choosing to cooperate will get -3. On the other hand, if prisoner 1 chooses to defect, while prisoner 2 chooses to cooperate, prisoner 1 will get a outcome of 0, while prisoner 1 will get an outcome of -2 if prisoner 2 also chooses to defect. Now, what we can see here is that the outcome for prisoner 1, if he chooses defect, is always better than if he chooses cooperate. So, prisoner 1 will most likely chooses to defect. Similarly, for prisoner 2, if prisoner 2 chooses to cooperate, the outcome if prisoner 1 chooses to cooperate is -1, while the outcome if prisoner 1 chooses defect for prisoner 2, if he cooperates, is -3. If prisoner 2 chooses to defect, prisoner 1 chooses to cooperate, the outcome will be 0, while prisoner 1 chooses to defect, prisoner 2 chooses to defect as well, the outcome will be -2. Similarly, for prisoner 2, the outcome for cooperation is much is worse than the outcome for defecting, because 0 is greater than -1, while -2 is greater than -3. Now we can see here that there is a dominant strategy, which is to defect, and each prisoner thinks that if the other cooperates, I should defect to get a better payoff. So let's say if prisoner 1 chooses to defect and prisoner 2 chooses to cooperate, prisoner 1 will get 0, while prisoner 2 will get -3. So this is the best scenario for prisoner 1. So it is much better for both of them to defect, so that none of them gets the benefit if one goes to cooperation. Now, hence each one finds that defecting is their best choice, regardless of the strategy of the other. This leads both to defect, resulting in a worse outcome for both than if they had cooperated, which meant that if both of them agreed to cooperate, they would have gotten a better result, which is -1 and -1, rather than both of them defecting, which is -2 and -2. But they don't know that, so yeah, so this is what they would normally prefer, which is to defect for both prisoners. Alright, now that we know that both prisoners would choose to defect, we can have a look at the table here, where the defects are circled, which is 0, -2, and 0, -2 for both prisoners. Now we can see that there are two circles in the bottom right corner, which is what we we call as the Nash equilibrium. Now, each prisoner's strategy is optimal given the other's strategy, which meant that prisoner 1, if he chooses to defect, it is still optimal if prisoner 2 chooses to cooperate or defect. Well, prisoner 2, if prisoner 2 chooses to defect, it doesn't matter what prisoner 1 chooses, cooperate or defect, it is still optimal. So both prisoners would choose to defect, and the Nash equilibrium is, as I said before, to defect and defect, which is -2, -2.
Here's a classic example of the prisoner's dilemma playing out on a global scale. The so-called chip war between the United States and China. Ideally, global free trade would let each country play to its strengths. The United States could keep its technological edge, or China could boost its economy by specializing in high-volume, cost-effective production of advanced tech products. But as competition heats up, especially in areas like semiconductors and AI, the United States has started imposing export controls to China, aiming to secure its national tech advantage. If both countries were to cooperate and keep trade open, they'd both benefit. The United States would profit from continued innovation and export revenues, while China would gain stable access to cutting-edge tech and continue expanding its production capabilities globally. However, if the United States defects by imposing trade restrictions while China cooperates, the United States gains a strategic advantage in securing its technology from potential rivals while still benefiting from China's open market. On the other hand, if China defects by restricting tech exports to the United States, while the US cooperates, China could create a production bottleneck, forcing the United States to find an alternative source and driving up costs. Now, if both countries defect by doubling down on restrictions, it's a trade war. This option is less damaging than one-sided defection because at least both sides understand the competitive footing and can invest in domestic capabilities. Each country loses some immediate benefits from open trade, but they focus on self-sufficiency and tech independence, reducing long-term vulnerabilities. The result is slower progress, but it avoids the instability that would come from only one side facing restrictions. The chip war prisoner's dilemma shows how complex trade and competition dynamics are. Decisions go beyond self-interest. They're also about predicting and responding to the other side's likely moves. So, let's see why the prisoner's dilemma is so significant. First, it highlights that cooperation leads to better outcomes in the long run. When both parties choose to cooperate rather than just acting out of self-interest, they end up better off together than they would if they tried to maximize individual gain. Second, by understanding the consequences of defection, both sides can consider the long-term costs and risk of taking that route. It helps them avoid that worst-case scenario where everyone loses out. And what's really interesting about Prisoner's Dilemma is that this game can be repeated multiple times. This repetition encourages each side to think carefully about reciprocity. Essentially, if you cooperate with me, I'll cooperate with you next time, and vice versa. It's a powerful way to promote trust and discourage defection, especially when everyone understands that there are consequences that carry forward.